Okay. Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, Douglas. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So, you were an attorney, yeah?
I am.
A civil justice advocate. And for 40 years. That's a long career, yeah?
44, but that's okay.
Are you still working or are you retired?
I'm semi-retired, I would say. A lot of my time is spent writing novels these days.
Okay, but you're not practicing law anymore?
I don't practice law. I have a company that finances litigation. What we do is help a plaintiff. Uh, the law, civil law especially, is a David versus Goliath kind of endeavor, and a plaintiff hires a lawyer on a contingency fee basis. That's the only way that client would be able to hire a lawyer. They don't typically have the resources to do that. And in addition to the cost of an attorney fee being financed essentially by the lawyer, um, we found that plaintiffs were behind the eight ball on other bills and expenses as well. So we created a vehicle by which our company can help a plaintiff through the process by paying his rent, by paying his car payment, by buying his food. If you're disabled in an accident, for instance, usually there's a substantial amount of work loss, and we try to bridge the gap between the injury and disability and the potential settlement that happens sometimes years later. So
Oh, I see.
what does the
Okay.
plaintiff do financially during that time? And we try to help them bridge that gap.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I had one issue many, many years ago where we had to sue the insurance company. I had a car stolen and they didn't want to pay because they, I don't know if they suspected that I did it or if they suspected that, uh, anyways, it was a long mess, but
Well,
it did take about,
if you've been in the business as long as I have, and you know insurance companies, it doesn't matter what they suspect. What they do is they try to delay, deny, confuse, and refuse, as they say, and that makes you desperate to resolve the case for less money.
well, that's
So,
exactly what they did. Yeah.
and so whether they suspected you or not, they delayed you on purpose so that you would be more desperate to settle your case.
Yeah. They offered $5,000 on a $30,000 car. And
Exactly.
yeah. All of this experience that you've had with civil law has inspired you to start writing. Are these fictions or are they just accurate non-fictional accounts of cases that you've had?
Well, the inspiration um, came from one case that I handled back in the 80s. Um, it was probably the most challenging case of my career. Two young boys had been sexually molested by a priest, and the church, and I mean not only the church that the priest uh, was the um, priest of, but I'm talking about the global church,
Right.
uh, had a propensity to cover up priest bad conduct and their own knowledge and complicity in these crimes. Um, so when the case was over, uh, I'll share with you that it felt like to me as a young lawyer at the time and someone who um, didn't have a tremendous amount of experience uh, with this David versus Goliath kind of um, battle. That's the only thing I can call these things. Back then, it felt like there was some powerful secret organization pulling the strings and hiding things, causing witnesses to lie, and covering up the truth. And I said to myself back then, when the case was over, someone needs to write a book about this. And a few people have. You may recall the movie Spotlight that talked about the multiple cases that occurred in Massachusetts.
Yes, I've seen that film.
But this is a fictional account, and it basically talks about clergy abuse, the dirty little secret. I created a clandestine organization called the Coalition, whose job it is to resolve these cases quickly, quietly, by any means possible. And it felt like that. The conspiracy of silence made my job much more difficult. They paid off victims. They sealed prior litigation files. And if you don't know what I mean by that, when a victim settles his case, the church would throw money at him or to seal or hide by agreement the court file. So if you researched whether there was a prior case or not, you would find no case. And they would pay victims extra money. And even the courts were complicit in that. The courts didn't get involved in contractual agreements between parties. So you would have settlement non-disclosure agreements and sealed files, as I indicated. Then the priest would get transferred to a different community and start all over again, and everybody would keep their mouth shut. And this cycle of abuse kept going on and on and on. The families would have a guilt trip laid on them, so they didn't want to hurt the church in the local or national press. And looking back on it all, and all of the cases that have occurred since my case, the whole thing is really quite unbelievable. So what I tried to do is write a fictional account, embellished for, quote, thriller, unquote, purposes, but based on the actual case that I handled. And the story is a single mother, a divorcee, is devoted to the church. The priest knows that these two boys are the victims of a divided family and need a father figure in their life. And he takes advantage of that, takes them on a camping trip, abuses them, and the cover-up begins. The coalition tries to keep it silent by any means possible. And if you saw the film Spotlight, you'll get a feel for what I'm talking about. I actually, when I market the book, talk about it kind of being like Spotlight versus The Firm. If you recall John Grissom's famous novel, The Firm,
Yeah.
there was a law firm being run silently by the mob, and this is essentially Spotlight meets The Firm.
Okay. What is the book called?
Betrayal of Faith.
Betrayal of Faith. You know, it's interesting that you picked a really good title for that too, because a couple of people that I've talked to, not interviewed, but just personal people that I've known, who went through the same thing with the Catholic Church in Boston. I'm originally from Boston.
Right.
I grew up there.
Right.
And they were victims of priest sexual abuse themselves when they were young. And they said it wasn't, and this was their opinion, but they said the trauma wasn't as much about the actual abuse, although that was very bad. They said the trauma was the loss of faith in God, in the church, in everything that they believed, their parents believed, their grandparents believed. This whole generational, unconditional faith to the church and to God, they said was completely wiped out by this event.
And think about this. worse than that is every profession, every business, uh, and you can look at the church um, as a quote business or a profession. Um, Maybe I'm not articulating myself well, but the point I'm making is there are predators out there in all shapes, sizes, and forms.
Right. Yeah.
So, what makes this particularly egregious is not that a priest, uh, that there's a bad priest who happens to molest a kid. That can happen anywhere. Now, we know since 40 years ago when I handled this case, we know that it seems to be more prevalent that the priesthood seems to attract these people for some reason or other. But putting that aside, putting this one predatory individual aside, you have people who are revered in the news. The Archbishop of Boston, let's say,
Yeah.
or the Archbishop of Detroit in my case. This was a gentleman who I won't mention his name, but this was the gentleman who was in line for the papacy when the Pope died.
Oh.
And I'm taking his deposition, and I know the answer to the questions I'm asking him, and he's lying to me. And when he walked in the room, having seen him on television time and time again, and having great respect for him and the things he's done for the community, here he is covering up a predator priest and lying to me. And what I find worse than the fact that you have a rogue priest is you have these enablers and these people who cover up their crimes, pay people off, and allow them to continue being priests so that they can molest other children in other communities. And for the life of me, for as long as this has been going on, that's the ultimate mystery to me of this scandal.
Mark, we do have to wrap this up. Unfortunately, our time is up on the interview. I know we've opened a big Pandora's box here with this topic, and we could go on and on for hours. Do you have a website that you want to give out that people can check out your book?
The website is markmbello, BELLO.com. My books are all available on Amazon. In order, they are Betrayal of Faith, Betrayal of Justice, Betrayal in Blue, Betrayal in Black, Betrayal High, and Supreme Betrayal, which is coming out in March.
Okay, great.
Each of them is about a social justice topic, usually inspired by the news. Betrayal of Faith is the only book I've written that was inspired by a particular case that I handled. Betrayal of Justice, for instance, was inspired by the 2016 election.
Yeah, that's another Pandora's box, too. Thank you so much for coming on this show. It was